Okay, ladies and gentlemen, so today with our screencast, we're really going to focus on the end of World War II, and really we're going to focus on the Pacific Theater and how the war ends in the Pacific Theater. So I know that we kind of skipped through a lot of the battles that take place in the European theater and many of the battles of World War II. So if that's something that you're interested in, there's tons of YouTube videos and documentaries that you could take a look at to kind of get a little bit more information about those battles. Hopefully you got a good base of understanding of that from your global history classes. So what we're going to focus on is really kind of the Pacific theater, which is pretty much an exclusive American theater. America's involved in the European theater and the Pacific. In the European theater, we're fighting along our allies, the British, and in certain cases the French, and also the Soviet Union. Really in the Pacific, though, it's just the United States kind of fighting against the Japanese. And so first thing that I just want to kind of remind you guys of is kind of the mentality that we're dealing with the Japanese. So the last time we spoke about the Japanese, when we talked about the causes of World War II, we really kind of focused on this idea that the Japanese, a way they saw themselves in the world, and they kind of viewed themselves as something called the Yamato Race, meaning that they viewed themselves in a superior light to all other Asian civilizations and societies at the time. And it's very much similar in a lot of ways to the way that the Nazis in Germany kind of viewed themselves as superior to other races within European society and the world. And so the Japanese, because of that, coupled with Shintoism and this idea that the emperor is a god, really have a lot of extreme beliefs and extreme approaches to fighting World War II. And you see that in everything from kamikaze missions to death charges that they make towards the American lines instead of surrendering. And this is an important factor to kind of understand with one of the reasons for why the United States feels like an atomic weapon is the only way to end the war in the Pacific. And you're going to have to try and gauge whether or not you think that that was the right decision or not the right decision. Now, as far as the battles are concerned in the Pacific, the battles are pretty treacherous. If you look at the strategy that America has to employ here, it's something called island hopping. So if you look out in the South Pacific, there are thousands upon thousands of islands that the Japanese have conquered and occupied. Now, America can't, retake all these different islands. So what they do is they're going to go for a strategic island, and that's why it's called island hopping, because they're not going to try and take back every island. They're just going to try and take back some of the key islands along the way. And when you think about it, the Japanese are dug into these islands to try to defend them, and so it makes reconquering the South Pacific very, very difficult, bloody warfare, and we're taking heavy casualties, during these campaigns out in the Pacific. Now, some of the key islands that the United States has to take towards the end of the war is going to be the island of Iwo Jima and the island of Okinawa. Now, the thing you want to understand here and you want to notice is that America kind of starts over here, like in the southeastern part of the Pacific, and we're kind of moving our way north, island hopping, and we're getting closer and closer to Japan. So one of the things that happens is the closer we get to Japan, the more, the higher the casualties get for the American side, and the more difficult it is to get to take the islands, because we're getting closer to the Japanese mainland itself, which itself is an archipelago, and so like the battles are getting more and more difficult. So these are two of the most famous battles of World War II towards the end in 1945. We'll come back to the Bataan Death March, but these two battles of Iwo Jima and Okinawa, America takes extremely high casualties. And you may be familiar with these battles through some movies. So there's two movies about Iwo Jima and Okinawa. I believe it's called Iwo Jima and the other one is just called Okinawa, but they're not that old, and you may have seen some of the footage of this. Now, a famous photograph that comes out of the Battle of Iwo Jima is this one, where you have 6 Marines who are putting up the United States flag on the top of Mount Suribachi, which is the mountain in Iwo Jima. And it's been made into a memorial in Washington, D.C. So if you go to Washington, D.C., this is part of the World War II memorial. And so these are two memorialized battles, and America is able to win, but with very, very heavy casualties. So you want to kind of understand that. Now, also what America is kind of dealing with is poor treatment of our prisoners of war at the same time. This is kind of before these battles of Iwo Jima and Okinawa, but another infamous event is the Bataan Death March. And this is kind of when the Japanese are going to force American POWs to march to the detriment of their lives in certain cases. And so, like, essentially, why I'm kind of going through a lot of this stuff is to kind of show you the extreme nature of what the United States is dealing with in the Pacific theater, because this definitely colors their idea to embark on using atomic weapons. Now, while all this is happening overseas, America is engaged in a massive project known as the Manhattan Project. So this is a secretive project that the United States has going on, and essentially what they're doing is they're trying to do research to try and construct an atomic weapon, which has never been done in the history of the world at this point. So America took our best and brightest scientists from all over the world, all over the United States. A lot of them, a good portion of them, are coming from other countries as well that have fled from Europe and from other parts of the world. And so what we did was we had different centers throughout America, and they're all working on different components of the atomic weapon. And they started this, early in the war. And so it takes 4 years for them to actually be able to build this atomic weapon. Now, the rest of the world is also working on atomic technology at the same time. So you have Nazi Germany working on it, the Japanese, pretty much everybody is working on trying to build some form of an atomic weapon. Now, our key scientists, everybody kind of associates Einstein, I think, with the atomic bomb. Although he does work on the project, he's really not the key scientist. So these are your key scientists you want to be aware of who work to, put the research in and were able to construct the atomic weapon. So you have Robert Oppenheimer, Niels Bohr, and Enrico Fermi. So these are some of your more famous people who worked on it, but you have hundreds of scientists who work on this, top secret project. Now, they are able to successfully test the atomic weapon in Los Alamos, New Mexico. And so that kind of gives the United States, although the rest of the world doesn't know it yet, a huge kind of edge as far as potentially ending the war. Now, our president at the time, so at this time by 1945, FDR has passed away, and his vice president, Harry Truman, has taken over as commander-in-chief. So now, at this point, Truman has kind of met with the decision or the potential decision to use this new technology that we have developed or not use it. So the atomic bomb, the strength of the atomic bomb at this time could destroy like a small city, essentially. So think of a city kind of like 60, 70, about 100,000 people. With one bomb, you drop one bomb, you could destroy that entire city. So Truman is kind of met with the decision of, well, should we use this weapon or should we not use this weapon? And there's a lot of different factors that he has to kind of like take into account when he decides to potentially use the weapon, and where he should potentially use the weapon is something he needs to think about as well. And so essentially, Truman does decide to use the atomic bomb twice. So we're going to drop the atomic bomb twice on the Japanese, once on a city named Hiroshima and once on a city named Nagasaki. So we drop an atomic bomb on Hiroshima on August 6th, 1945, and then on August 9th, 1945, we drop one on the city of Nagasaki. Now, a couple questions you have to ask yourself. First, well, we chose a civilian target, so we dropped it on a city. Why do you think Truman decided to drop it on a city? Two, why did we drop 2 atomic bombs? So I'm going to try and give you guys some of the answers as to why we did what we did. So first, why we chose the cities that we did. These cities were largely not bombed during World War II. So Truman chose these cities to try and showcase to the Japanese the potential disastrous, effects of the bomb, to convince them to surrender. Because the United States kind of felt like the Japanese were not going to be willing to surrender, and so they needed to be shown the incredible power of the atomic bomb in order to convince them to actually surrender. So that's why they chose the sites that they did. Second thing to kind of think about, or to try and answer is, okay, ladies and gentlemen, so the second major factor that you might be thinking about is, why did we drop 2 atomic bombs? Well, essentially, we're trying to use the atomic bomb to get the Japanese to surrender. So after we drop the first atomic bomb on Hiroshima, the Japanese do not surrender. And so the United States felt it necessary to drop a second atomic bomb on Nagasaki. Now, another interesting fact that kind of precipitated these events is, before we dropped the first atomic bomb on Hiroshima, we also dropped leaflets on the city, kind of explaining the atomic bomb and basically the potential after effects of it, to try and convince the civilian population to leave the city. Now, the civilian population did not leave the city, largely because they kind of probably viewed it as like a propaganda attempt by the United States to try and scare the population. Nevertheless, after the second atomic bomb, the Japanese do surrender to the United States. And so this takes place in 1945, and this officially ends World War II. Now, what we have to kind of talk about and try and figure out is, not only why did President Truman decide to drop the atomic bomb, but do you think he made the right decision? So I want you guys to stop maybe for a second and start to think about, what are some of the reasons potentially for why Truman might have done this? And what do you think is really behind this decision? And do you think it was the right decision? Because it's one of the most monumentous decisions in world history. So what do you guys think? Why did he do it? Was it the right decision to use this new technology that America had developed? So these are some of the potential theories out there that like different historians have thrown out there about why America or Truman might have done it. So the first one, the Japanese would never surrender, and it would take a full invasion of Japan, estimated to cost an additional 1 million lives to win the war. So that is the first part of its opinion, like they would never surrender. But the second part of it is the estimated potential military cost of it and of human life for the United States. About 1 million men would die if we had to invade Japan, not counting the civilian casualties on the Japanese side, and the casualties for the Japanese military. And the dropping of the atomic bombs, you had roughly a couple 100,000 people did die in the dropping of the atomic bombs, but significantly less than would have taken place had we invaded Japan. The second theory, the atomic bomb was used as a sign of strength to intimidate the Soviet Union and give the U.S. the upper hand in the post-war world. So this is an interesting one. This is kind of saying that it's aimed mostly at our ally, the Soviet Union, who eventually becomes our enemy after World War II. And you have to kind of decide, were we really trying to intimidate the Soviet Union with this? Partially, we didn't want the Soviet Union to join us. They were sending troops to join us in the Pacific Theater, and we didn't want that. Because if you look at what happens in World War II, after World War II in Europe, a lot of these countries get divided up. And so maybe the United States kind of saw the situation and saw the potential Soviet Union as an enemy and didn't want to facilitate them being involved in the Pacific Theater. Theory 3, the American people were weary and wanted a quick end to the war, and they wouldn't tolerate 2 to 3 more years of war. So maybe America at this point as a country is kind of tired of being at war. 4 years is a long time. So maybe it was designed to ease potential tension on the home front more than anything else. And then the last one, the U.S. did not want their allies to join in the Pacific Theater because it would infringe upon the post-war Pacific sphere of influence. So that's kind of like similar to this second one that I kind of mentioned, not wanting the Soviet Union to come in and have to divide up the Pacific after the war is over. So what I'm going to ask you guys to do is kind of try and analyze these ones and see which of these you kind of feel is really the major driving factor behind Truman's decision to drop the atomic bomb, and whether you think it was the right decision or the wrong decision for the United States, knowing the ramifications of it and the world that it created after the ending of World War II. All right, so we're going to stop there, and we will pick up tomorrow with kind of like what's going on the home front.